Hello and welcome to the first episode of Al-Ghus Essays. I hope you're as excited as I am to be here. And to start off, I've decided to look into Yemen. After intensive research into Yemen's cultural scene, two key themes appear continuously: tradition and history. Tradition is at the forefront, and we don't have to look far to see it appear repeatedly in all aspects of the Yemeni culture, identity, and society. Being one of the very few narrative films from Yemen, A New Day in Old Sanaa is a film that brilliantly captivates key values fundamental to the Yemeni culture and identity. A New Day in Old Sanaa is a unique film within Yemen's history of filmmaking, as it is a film based on a tragic love story with the city's dynamics displayed as its backdrop. The film is from the perspective of two protagonists, a Western photographer, Federico, and his assistant, a local man named Tariq. I believe this is a subtle nod to the director, Badr bin Hirsi, as he is a Yemeni immigrant based in Europe. Federico is a vehicle to give spectators a glimpse into this dynamic society voyeuristically. With him, he brings us intrigue that foreigners have towards the secretive society. This is supported by his evident enchantment by Sanaa and fascination to capture his people. On the other hand, Tariq plays the guide for Federico and the spectators, and he becomes the moral compass to gauge social conduct. He is a young man from a respectably honorable family. As the story unfolds, cracks in Tariq's firm cultural and moral boundaries appear, as he is tackled by the dilemmas of balancing personal desires against social obligations. A New Day in Old Sanaa is set during the week of Tariq's wedding to the daughter of a respectable judge, Bilgis. One night, Tariq finds a girl dancing in the street wearing the same white dress he had gifted to his fiancée. Convinced it's Bilgis, he's even more confident that he's marrying the one. Unbeknownst to him, the dancing girl is actually a local henna artist called Anis, and their stark difference in social status acts as an obstacle for the young couple. Their forbidden love is unraveled throughout the film as they face the challenges of culture and society. This leaves Tariq in a difficult position, weighing the consequences of tarnishing his family's reputation that they've spent generations building against his own personal yearnings. Should he throw away a marriage that their families have carefully curated just to elope with someone of lesser status, knowing that he would have dishonored his family in the process? For the next section, I'll be talking about Federico and Tariq's roles within the films, and also how their relationship and dynamics is portrayed. The director manages to explore Sanaa by educating spectators and satisfying their curiosity beautifully. As previously mentioned, the character Tariq performs as the insider, and he lays down the complicated, intricate paths of tradition and costumes vital to the Yemeni culture, and then allowing spectators to align themselves with Federico's curiosity, who is often seen tiptoeing these cultural boundaries. Federico plays the archetype foreigner, a sponge for our local counterpart to absorb all of this cultural dialogue. Having this dynamic makes it only natural for Federico's alternative perspective to often spark conversations about how Yemeni society is structured, and also bring attention to the emotional and mental struggle these social expectations have on a person. For example, there is a debate between Tariq and Federico about balancing romantic desires and domestic responsibilities. Although Federico knows that things are not as simple as they would be in his world, and there are many different layers to Tariq's problem, it is apparent that he does not truly understand it entirely. At face value, Federico seems to be acquainted with Sanaa. He appears to know about the fundamental values prevalent in Yemeni culture, but yet he still does not understand that his seemingly innocent, constant intrigue breaks social boundaries, making those around him uncomfortable. There are two moments that come to mind. One, he is advised not to look directly at the veiled women, but yet he still expresses frustration when he cannot take pictures of the women without them walking away. This leaves Tariq to remind him that that's because you are not meant to take pictures of them. 2. Upon seeing black henna on the hands of a local woman, otherwise known as nagash, Federico gets curious and he asks to see how it is applied. Tariq is a little apprehensive since nagash is typically only for women. Nonetheless, they manage to hire a local black henna artist called Anis. Accompanying her is her younger brother, aged 7. His presence takes Federico by surprise as he discovers that there is no minimum age required for the male chaperone. Funnily enough, the 7-year-old is considered to be socially adequate to protect his sister. The role that Anis's younger brother fulfills is traditionally found in Yemeni culture, as the male escort protects his female family members against men of non-kin. The presence of the chaperone keeps the status quo and deters other men's ill intentions, making sure that the female family members' honors and reputations are maintained, but also the overall families. Therefore, in this scene, Anis's younger brother acts as a barrier between the unknown men Federico and Tariq, but also against gossiping neighbors, as we see this happen later when Tariq is seen at Anis's door by a nosy neighbor. Federico asks for the nagash to be done on his back. This request takes both Tariq and Anis by surprise for many reasons. Firstly and foremost, Nagash is typically for women and lasts for weeks. Secondly, Federico removes his shirt in front of Anis, an innocently normal action within Federico's world, but not in Sana's. Thirdly, this means that Anis would have to touch Federico to apply the Nagash, another social no-no. So she puts on gloves. This acts as another layer of protection. Fourth, Tarek is tasked with photographing the whole act. And Anis is initially uncomfortable with this to the fear of being photographed. This is one of the many blatant examples in which Federico innocently pushes these cultural boundaries without really understanding how rooted they are in daily social life. There is no doubt that Federico is an outsider. Despite his efforts to immerse himself into society, with many unwritten rules dictating the Yemeni social structure, he will always be considered an outsider. He mimics anthropologists who have written and photographed extensively about the Yemeni culture and society, such as Stephen C. Catton, Tim McIntosh Smith, Freya Stark, and Victoria Clark. To the modern world, Yemen has been an anthropological case study, so a large proportion of our understandings of Yemen's history, social, and cultural structures, at least in the West, have come from the accounts of such figures, meaning that the foundations of what we know are through the eyes of a visual case study. At the beginning of the film, Federico monologues. But what fascinates me about the city is not its architecture, not its colourful people, but its untold stories and mysteries hidden behind the stone walls. Is this the perspective of someone who really wants to integrate into society, or a tourist's? This dialogue of us and them becomes blatantly apparent when foreigners see the locals through the eyes of something to learn from or be fascinated by. On the other hand, this divide becomes more prominent when the locals are not completely accepting of others integrating among them. This distance between us and them is interesting because Yemen has a tribal society deeply rooted in ancestry. Without any blood ties, the foreigners, whether they're from a different country or the town next door, will always be the unknown and untrustworthy to the locals, as they do not have the legitimacy of a familial legacy, meaning that they will be more accepting or open to you if you were one of them by blood. There are many elements of this sprinkled throughout the film. For instance, even though Federico has learned some Arabic to communicate and banter with the locals, they still regard him as the Westerner, and ironically look upon him as a spectacle. The locals are fascinated by him, such as the shopkeepers, Bilqis, and the other local ladies. The dialogue of us and them becomes blatantly apparent when foreigners see the locals through the eyes of something to learn from or be fascinated by. Perhaps the most appropriate way of contextualizing this us versus them narrative is through the concept of ebb. For the Arab-speaking world, this is a minefield of unspoken rules of do's and don'ts one must play by to be a vital member of society. An explicit example of this is the character of Ravi. Federico's Indian housemaid teaches English to the local children. As a form of disciplining a disruptive student, who is Bilqis' sister, by the way, he strikes her hand with a ruler. However, little did he know that the student's threat of getting Ravi in trouble had more weight to them, as he had unknowingly crossed an unwritten cultural rule. For the rest of the film, Ravi is a fugitive, evading the police and trying to smuggle himself out of the city. Interestingly enough, he disguises himself as a local man and then a woman, and then when we see him, he is chased by the haunted screams of his mistakes as they echo through the scene. Although Ravi's moments are entertaining and add the breath of fresh air to the overarching heavier themes such as the forbidden love story and accused theft, it is a blatant example of the societal structure of us versus them. There are also interesting examples to note about this divide, such as during filming, the actor who was originally meant to play Federico was stabbed by a fanatic who wanted to stop production, and the actresses in the film received tons of criticism from the press for taking part in the film. Perhaps the director's decision to include Federico's interaction with the characters of Sana and Ravi's whole arc is much reflective of Bin Hirsi's personal relationship as being an exiled Yemeni, whose feet are rooted in the culture whilst lingering on the outskirts of the boundaries of said society. Bin Hirsi reflects on the comical ridiculousness of these strong values and morals in Yemeni society. Moreover, it could have been exaggerated, as most of these interactions Yemeni people have had with the outside or Western world is through the eyes of foreign military or anthropologists. Both the locals and foreigners have not had the chance to truly merge or accept the differences. Since Yemen is a very homogeneous society built on the foundations of tradition and honor, logically this process will take a longer time. With his secondary protagonist Tariq, Bin Hirsi provides us with another side to the coin and honestly one of the main driving points of interest within the film. Tariq doubles as both Federico's and the spectator's local guide into the functionality of his society and culture. He educates, explains, and justifies the methodology of his clan's members, giving some sense and understandings to their doings. However, as the film progresses, Tariq's personal life quickly becomes entangled and difficult to separate from Federico's exploration of Yemeni society. Going between perspectives from the outsider seamlessly to within, we watch Tariq grapple with the emotional turmoil between social obligations and personal desires. Engaged to one but in love with another, Tariq seems to lose his tight grasp over his moral compass. The dilemma is more than just following the heart and finding true love. For a character like Tariq, who is so set in his boundaries and to follow societal rules to a T, to go ahead and be willing to break said rules is unseen. We see that Tariq is flawed and has blurred the line between the unknown and the comfortable, in which he confides in his sister, seeks advice from Federico, and asks for forgiveness from God. Another element of this film that Bin Hirsi does is flipping the script on tradition, by going past social curtains and focusing parts of the story from within the woman's world. I truly appreciate this additional layer, as it shows curious spectators the depth of this vibrant social life of Yemeni women, something Federico does not have the privilege to do, but also shows a refreshing perspective to the overall arching narrative, giving us exciting personalities and relationships. Behind these closed doors, the narrative focuses on the tales of the infamous white dress, given to Bilqis by Tariq. The Nagish artist, Anis, is accused of stealing the dress by Bilqis, and as a police investigation ensues, the truth is revealed. Bilqis had thrown the dress out the window as it looked cheap in her eyes. Anis had stumbled across the dress in the street, and she wears it at night to dance. Bin Hirsi managed to interweave the two sides of the story. This decision to explore the woman's domain provides a deeper emotional connection between the spectators and the characters. Since this complicates the narrative, given that spectators know that Anis is not a thief and she's at disadvantage, in love with a man of a higher status who's betrothed to someone else, and that Bilqis is a mean-spirited person, we fear for both Tariq and Anis. Delving into the exploration of the woman's domain, Bin Hirsi does this both physically and metaphorically. Within the context of the film, these spaces are the social circles, the home, and the wedding. Looking into these spaces will provide a richer understanding of the complex workings and social dynamics present within Yemeni culture. Throughout the film, we often see the local ladies in groups as they spend the day selling fresh produce or gossiping. These social circles function as a primary source of information within the community, similar to the local grandmothers who know everything that happens in a village. Within the context of the film, they drive the narrative forward by building tension while simultaneously adding a refreshing air of comedy. For instance, these moments of tension are when the ladies play detective with the mystery of the white dress, discovering who stole it by noticing it drying on the roof of Anis's house, as well as when the rumor of Tariq's interest with Anis reaches Bilqis' wedding ceremony. Other notable moments of comedy are when the group leader, Heshpa, the wife of the police chief, lies about her invitation to the wedding of the century, and she tries to get invited throughout the course of the film. It's only when Bilqis' mother asks for her husband's help that she gets an invitation. It's apparent that these ladies are not simply background decorations. They also have an interesting dynamic amongst themselves with a clear social hierarchy and status quo that Bin Hirsi manages to explore without distracting from the main narrative of the film. When discussing the concept of gendered spaces, specifically concerning the woman's domain, the home is the most upfront example. The home is undoubtedly the physical representation of this feminine world behind those four walls and closed doors. This is where most women are confined to spend most of the time, either by the restrictions of their own family or society. The home is usually reserved for the family, so that the female members can freely and comfortably exist without the anxiety of interacting with non-kin men or be seen without a veil. Like all the women within A New Day in Old Sanaa, they remove their hijab and abaya once they enter the shelter of the home. They also appear to be more relaxed, showing their true personalities as they become more talkative and reactive. I found it quite interesting how Bin Hirsi portrays Tariq's relationship with his sister Qadar in the comfort of the home. They are siblings who clearly respect and love each other dearly, but are also comfortable enough to be playful with each other. Tariq can confide in Qadar about his interest in the dancing lady, and she is comfortable enough to express her concerns about his future. For this, we have the comparison between the two conversations between the siblings, where she advises Tariq to take his career more seriously and when she lectures him on his selfishness for wanting to elope with Anis. For it is Qadar who is the point of formal communication between Bilqis and Tariq. Her duty as his female kin is to bridge that gap. She is comfortable enough to lecture him about his responsibilities and duties, keeping him in line and creating an interesting power dynamic in this space. Perhaps if these conversations happened outside the home, she wouldn't feel so comfortable or bold to state her mind. Another critical representation of the woman's domain I found interesting, at least in the Yemeni culture, is the wedding. Women are usually hidden in the background, and the wedding is where they shine, vocally and visually. The wedding scene is where the bride is greeted and celebrated with only the female members of society. Throughout the preparation of the wedding, from the nagash to the dress to the actual ceremony, these women are the ones who celebrate and see the bride in her white dress. To celebrate the union, the women sing their happiness with high-pitched rhythmic trills known as ululation. Within Arab society, this is an expression of extreme emotion often heard at weddings or funerals in some countries. On days like this, it is hard to ignore the women as their voices echo throughout the town. The groom and the men walk along the town streets, singing their celebrations. This walk is decorated with string lights that hang like vines from house to house, lighting the way. so everyone can partake in the celebration in their respective ways. Side note, I'd like to point out that Anis gets to wear the white dress, and Bilqis ungratefully throws it out without giving it a chance. These are clear indications of the type of characters that we have, as Bilqis is constantly portrayed to be unlikable, and it is clear that she doesn't seem to possess any remorse or have any form of respect for others. She lies about the dress and accuses Anis for the sake of saving her own skin. She does not seem to have a good relationship with those around her, as she is vile to her sister and her maid and others. It is ironically fitting that her maid is the one who rats her out in the end, demonstrating that her power can only go so far. Whereas Anis is depicted to be the pure of heart and genuinely naive girl who dared to dream and love, only to be crushed by reality. For the final part of this essay, I'll be discussing whether or not this film can be classified as a love story. The film already speaks on multiple levels, but what I appreciate is that A New Day in Old Sanaa challenges the spectator's understanding and views of what a traditional love story should be and how it should end. The director reminds us that society, reputation, and duty will always be there, and it will over-trump personal whims, especially in the context of the Yemeni society. This brings the question whether or not the film is a true love story or a story about marriage. Following the love story. Determined to follow his heart and keeping his vow of marrying the girl he saw dancing in his white dress, Tariq sets up a plan with Anis to meet at the clock tower at night to run away together. He would give up his marriage to Bilqis' societal status and his reputation for a new life together with Anis. However, he would not be the only one damaged by this act, as it would tarnish his family's reputation and status. His sister demonstrates these societal consequences very well during the scene where she talks some sense into Tariq. Everyone entirely dismisses the concept that Tariq saw Bilqis dancing in the street because someone like Bilqis' status and reputation would never do something like that, as well as unveiled and without a chaperone. Ghada, Tariq's sister, even addresses these rumors with Bilqis because she would not be able to allow a loose woman like that to marry her brother, even though Tariq suspects that she's lying just to protect herself from the gossip. This is pretty fair, as it is gossiping neighbors who overhear Tariq's confession to Anis and causing embarrassment to Ghada and Bilqis. Yemeni society is very much about marrying up or within the same circles. Often, many family members are included in the decision. In these scenarios, an individual is left out, as it is a decision that benefits everyone in some shape or form. So in this case, Tariq's personal desires conflicts from the family's overall status and goal. This also translates into his career choices, as his sister disapproves of his role as Federico's assistant, since he needs a man's job to support his future family. Moreover, Federico's stance that everyone has options does not apply to Tariq. It is all about duty and roles, not about what is suitable and fit for the individual, which becomes a secondary thought and concept for them. It would be selfish of him to put all that in jeopardy for a woman, especially a woman of the same social class as Anis. It is expected of him to grow to love Bilqis with time. Tariq mentions that he's been childhood friends with Bilqis, but has not seen her since. Is this a cause of concern for the sake of marriage? Is this enough for Tariq to justify his love for Bilqis? Or does he trust his community to pick the right woman for him? Tariq decides to go ahead with the wedding to Bilqis, leaving Anis waiting for him at the clock tower, waiting night after night with packed bags. It appears that Tariq has chosen to go through with the wedding out of fear of being isolated, and probably not wanting to deal with the catastrophic consequences of selfishly choosing love over tradition. The wedding was something that has been in works long before Tariq, and perhaps when things hit the fans, deep down he knows he wouldn't be able to truly explain or justify his actions. At the end of A New Day in Old Sanaa, I'm left with many questions, motivated by my Western perspective. Was Tariq too scared to leap? Was Anis foolish for believing it could become something? Was Tariq really held between a rock and a hard place? Does he owe anything to Anis for leaving her behind? What does the ending mean? Is love an abandoned concept in Yemeni society? The actual marriage occurs between two people who don't even know each other or speak throughout the film. Despite all of these open-ended inquiries, Bin Hirsi has managed to direct a wonderfully entertaining film that gives you an in-depth perspective of Yemeni society, but also from a comfortable distance, where you can understand the why and how, but still be curious for more. He has found a hilarious balance between the comical unspoken rules outsiders may struggle to grasp, like with Ravi, and also the gravity of these rules, like with the Nakash scene. With each character, he brings depth and is able to build his own Sanaa beautifully and wholeheartedly, making it a lived place. A very different perspective from what we have ever seen of Yemen in the modern day. A New Day in Old Sanaa is a film that wonderfully grasps the tradition and history of Yemeni culture and ideologies. And Sanaa is the perfect backdrop for exploring these themes with a sprinkle of new and excitement, like with Federico and Ravi, as they try to navigate the winding walls of the city, metaphorically and literally. If you made it this far, thank you very much for listening, and I truly appreciate it. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please tune in for the next episode as I continue to explore the Yemeni cultural and literal scene.